They overlooked your kindness. They underestimated your silence. They mistook your patience for weakness. They watched you give and give and give, and somewhere along the way they decided that a person who never demands anything must not need anything at all. That was their mistake. Because here's something many people never learn until it's far too late. The quietest person in the room is usually the one paying the closest attention. And the one who stops explaining themselves is usually the one who has finally understood something. Somewhere out there tonight, someone is thinking about a version of you that no longer exists. They're remembering the person who apologized first, the person who always answered, the person who stayed a little too long, forgave a little too fast, and shrank a little too easily just to keep the peace. And they have no idea who you've become since then. This is a story about that gap, the distance between who someone remembers and who someone becomes. Many Pisces say they know that distance intimately, that long, invisible stretch of time when nothing looks like it's changing on the outside and everything is changing underneath, if you've ever felt invisible. Stay with this, not because the stars are about to reveal a secret about your life, but because sometimes a story holds up a mirror, and in that mirror you recognize something you've been carrying alone for years. By the end of this, you may see your quiet season differently, not as the years you lost, but as the years that built you. Beat. Music drops out. Silence. Let's begin. Imagine a house with a room nobody enters. The furniture is still there. The photographs still hang on the walls, but the door stays closed, and eventually everyone in that house forgets the room exists, not out of cruelty, out of habit. Many Pisces describe their early years, sometimes their early decades, as living inside that room, present but unopened. You were the one people came to when they were falling apart. You held the phone at midnight while someone cried about a person who didn't deserve them. You remembered birthdays nobody remembered back. You noticed when someone's voice changed on a Tuesday and you asked if they were okay, and they said yes. And you knew they were lying, and you gently made space anyway. And then, when your own world cracked open, the room went quiet. That's the wound. It's rarely dramatic. It rarely arrives as one betrayal you can point to. It arrives as an accumulation. 1,000 small moments of being the one who understands, and never the one who is understood. Some people carry a loud kind of pain. Yours may have been the kind that smiles through dinner. Ask yourself honestly, how many times did you say it's fine when it absolutely was not fine? How many times did you swallow a sentence because you already knew how the argument would end, with you apologizing for having a feeling? There's a specific exhaustion that comes from being emotionally fluent in a world that never learned your language. You could read a room in 4 seconds. You could feel a shift in someone's tone before they even knew they were upset. And that sensitivity, which should have been treated as a gift, got labelled instead. Too soft, too sensitive, too emotional, too much. And somewhere in there, a quiet and dangerous idea got planted. Maybe I am the problem. Many Pisces say that's the belief that cost them the most years, not the people who left. Not the opportunities that fell apart. The belief that being deeply feeling was a defect to be managed rather than a strength to be aimed. So you adapted. You became excellent at making yourself small. You learned to anticipate other people's moods so precisely that you stopped noticing your own. You became the emotional weather system for everyone around you, while nobody once asked what season you were in. And through it all, you kept showing up. That's the part people underestimate. They mistook your endurance for compliance. They saw someone who didn't fight back and assumed there was nothing behind the calm. Music shifts, low strings enter. But here's what they missed. Nothing that survives that much pressure stays the same. There's a moment in every quiet story that nobody films. It doesn't come with a soundtrack. There's no montage. It happens on an ordinary day, usually somewhere unglamorous. A parked car, a kitchen at 2 a.m, a bathroom floor with the fan running so nobody hears. It's the moment you stop asking, why did they do that to me, and start asking, what am I going to do with what's left? That question changes everything, not immediately. That's the part people get wrong about transformation. We're sold a story where healing looks like a decision. One bold night, one dramatic exit, and the person walks into the sunrise reborn. Real change almost never works that way. Real change looks like doing one small thing differently, then doing it again the next day and feeling absolutely nothing shift for months. Imagine a river running against stone. On any given day, the stone wins. Zoom out across years, and the stone has been carved into a canyon. That's the season many Pisces describe. Nothing visible, everything moving. You started noticing things, small things, the way your body tightened around certain people, the way you rehearsed conversations before having them, the way you felt relief, actual physical relief, when certain plans got cancelled. And instead of dismissing those signals, you finally started listening to them. Then something unexpected happened. You began to grieve, not just the people, the years, the version of yourself that tried so hard to be chosen. And grief, when you finally let it move through you instead of storing it, does something strange. It clears space. In that space, something started to grow that hadn't had room before. Discernment. You stopped confusing intensity with love. You started noticing that the people who were consistent were rarely the ones who were the most passionate about you at the beginning. Self-trust. For years, your intuition had been overruled by other people's explanations. Now, when your gut said something's off here, you finally started giving that voice a vote. Emotional stamina. Feelings that used to knock you flat for a week started lasting an afternoon. Not because they hurt less, because you had learned how to hold them without drowning. Perspective. This one may be the quietest of all. You started seeing that the people who hurt you were often operating from their own unhealed places, not as an excuse, as information. Understanding stopped being the same thing as accepting. And this is where the story becomes interesting, because every one of those qualities was forged by the exact experiences you would have skipped if you'd been given the choice. The overgiving taught you where your limits actually are. The being unheard taught you how to hear yourself. The loneliness, that long, hollow season nobody claps for, taught you that your own company is survivable. And once a person learns that, something fundamental shifts in what they'll tolerate. You didn't become hard. That's what people expect. That's the cheap version of this story. The wounded person who builds a wall and calls it strength. You did something much harder. You stayed soft and got a spine. Long beat. Music swells, then pulls back. Most people never realise this. Strength that comes from bitterness is loud and it's brittle. Strength that comes from healing is quiet and it does not break. Now let's talk about the part in the title. The watching. Not because anyone can promise you what another person is thinking. Nobody can. But there's something real underneath that idea, and it's worth understanding. Because it's not mystical at all. It's human. People notice change most sharply in the ones they thought they had figured out. Think about it. There's a category of person in every life. The reliable one. The one whose responses you can predict. You know exactly how they'll react, exactly how much they'll forgive, exactly how long it takes them to come back around. And then one day, they don't. The message doesn't get an instant reply. The invitation gets a simple, unbothered no. The old story that used to get a reaction lands on a face that gives nothing back. That is disorienting, not because you did anything to them, but because a fixed point in their world just moved. Here's the mechanism nobody talks about. People don't notice your growth when you announce it. They notice it when you stop performing, when you stop over-explaining your decisions, when you stop filling silences that aren't yours to fill, when you stop auditioning for a place at a table you've already outgrown. Ask yourself, have you ever watched someone recalibrate in real time when you didn't react the way they expected? That flicker of confusion before they cover it? That's what unfamiliarity looks like on someone's face. There's a reason for it. Confidence isn't a volume level, it's a consistency. It shows up in 100 small signals that people register without articulating. How long you take to answer, whether you defend yourself against a comment that doesn't deserve one, whether your yes and your no both mean something. When those signals change, people feel it before they can explain it, and human beings pay attention to what they can't explain. Some Pisces describe this stage as the strangest one of all, because it arrives without satisfaction attached. The apology you rehearsed for years never comes. The acknowledgement never arrives in the form you imagined. Instead, you get something quieter, a name from the past that resurfaces, a message that says nothing but is clearly asking something, a story that gets back to you. And here's the twist that catches most people off guard. By the time they're watching, you're not. You're busy. You're rebuilding. You're in the middle of a life that is finally yours, and the ghost you spent years trying to prove something to has become just a person you used to know. That's not revenge. Revenge is still a relationship. Revenge means they still hold the steering wheel. This is something better. This is indifference that took years of work to earn. Music cue, single piano note held. If this story speaks to you, leave a comment saying, "I choose growth," not for the algorithm, because there's something about naming a decision out loud that makes it feel real. And because someone scrolling through those comments tonight needs to see that they're not the only one who's been through this quiet season. Now, silence. It's the most misread thing a person can do. And, for many Pisces, the most transformative skill they ever developed. Because there are two kinds of silence, and almost everyone confuses them. The first is the silence of fear. It's the one you knew for years. Swallowing the sentence. Not rocking the boat, choosing peace over truth because truth cost too much last time. That silence feels like a stone in the chest, and it doesn't protect you, it just delays the bill. The second is the silence of choice. That one feels completely different. It's not the absence of words, it's the presence of restraint. It's knowing exactly what you could say, having it fully loaded, and deciding it isn't worth the ammunition. Learning to tell those two apart is one of the great turning points of emotional maturity. Imagine someone standing in the middle of an argument they used to lose every single time. In the old version of the story, they'd defend themselves, they'd explain, they'd produce evidence, dates, examples, trying to build a case airtight enough that the other person would finally have to admit it. And it never worked. Because you cannot logic someone into understanding you when they're committed to not understanding you. The new version of that person just says, "Okay," and leaves, not cold, not cruel, just done. That single word costs more self-control than an hour of shouting, and it changes the entire dynamic, because arguments require two participants, and you just resigned. Here's what silence actually protects. It protects your energy. Every conversation you don't have with someone determined to misread you is hours of your life returned to you. It protects your progress. There's a reason people who are genuinely rebuilding talk about it less. When you announce a plan, part of your brain treats it as already achieved. When you keep it quiet, the only thing that can satisfy that hunger is doing it. It protects your peace. Not every accusation deserves a defense. Some people aren't asking a question. They're setting a trap and hoping you'll fill it. And it protects your dignity, because there is nothing that ages better than the things you didn't say. Beat. There's a version of you, maybe a few years back, who would have needed the last word, who would have needed them to know how much it hurt, know how unfair it was, know exactly which part of it broke something. That need is real, and it isn't shameful. It comes from a genuine place, the desire to be seen accurately by someone who saw you wrong. But here's the turning point. At some stage you realize you can't outsource that. No confession from them was ever going to fix what happened inside you. The only person who could confirm your reality was you. And the day you stopped needing their agreement to know your own experience was true, that was the day the silence stopped feeling like defeat and started feeling like power. Now comes the hardest chapter, and it's the one most people skip: letting go. Not the version on the coffee mugs, not the pastel version that says forgive everyone and feel light immediately. The real one, the one that takes months and feels, at first, like losing. Because resentment does something clever. It disguises itself as loyalty. It whispers that if you release the anger, you're saying it didn't matter, that you're excusing them, that you're closing a case that was never tried. That whisper keeps people chained to their worst chapter for decades. Here's the reframe worth sitting with. Forgiveness, as a practice, has very little to do with the other person. Many people find it isn't a gift you hand over. It's a debt you stop trying to collect. Because that's what resentment really is. A bill you keep presenting to someone who has no intention of paying, in a currency they don't even carry. And every time you present it, it costs you an evening, a night's sleep, a conversation with someone who's actually here. Ask yourself the honest question: how much rent are they paying to live in your head? Pause. Letting go doesn't mean the door swings back open. This is where it gets misunderstood constantly. You can fully release someone and never speak to them again. You can wish someone genuine peace from a distance you will never close. Forgiveness is an internal event. Access is a separate decision entirely, and that one is yours to make with clear eyes. What letting go actually looks like in practice is much less cinematic than it sounds. It looks like the memory arriving and not hijacking your whole afternoon. It looks like hearing their name and noticing that your stomach didn't drop. It looks like realizing sometime later that you haven't checked, haven't wondered, haven't run that old conversation for the 10,000th time, hunting for the sentence that would have changed everything. And then there's the harder release, the one nobody warns you about. Letting go of who you were. That earlier version of you, the one who tried so hard, who stayed too long, who gave to people who were never going to give back. There's a temptation to be furious at that person, to look back and think, how could I have been so blind? But be careful there. That person was doing the best they could with what they knew and what they'd been taught about love. That person kept the light on through a very long night. That person is the reason you're still standing. You don't have to be angry at them. You can thank them and let them rest. Music, warmth entering for the first time. That's when something loosens. That's when people describe waking up one morning and noticing the air feels different. Not because circumstances changed, but because they finally stopped carrying something they'd been carrying so long they'd forgotten it was optional. And that's when the next part becomes possible. Let's talk about the comeback, but not the one that's usually sold, not the fantasy where you walk into a room and everyone who doubted you falls silent, and the person who hurt you sees what they lost and a slow clap builds from the back. That fantasy is a trap. It puts the finish line in someone else's hands. The real comeback is stranger and far more satisfying. The real comeback is waking up on a completely ordinary Tuesday and realizing you feel okay. Not euphoric, not triumphant, just okay, steady, like a house that finally stopped shifting. It's catching yourself laughing at something and noticing it came from your chest and not your throat. It's the first time you say no without a paragraph of justification attached, and the ground doesn't open up. It's noticing that the people currently in your life don't require performance, that you're not managing them, that you're not scanning their face for approval before you speak. That's what a comeback looks like from the inside. And here's the part that builds, because a life rebuilt on that foundation moves differently. When you're no longer spending most of your energy on emotional damage control, you suddenly have an enormous amount of it available. That's the fuel nobody accounts for. People who have healed something significant often become alarmingly effective, and it's not mysterious, it's arithmetic. They got their attention back. The work gets better because you're actually present for it. The relationships get better because you're choosing them instead of accepting them. Your standards get higher, not out of arrogance, but because you finally know what the cheap version costs. And that sensitivity, the trait that got you labelled too much for years, it becomes your sharpest instrument. Because emotional intelligence in a person who has also learned boundaries is genuinely rare. You can read a room and hold your ground. You can feel someone's pain and not take responsibility for fixing it. You can care deeply and leave when it's time. That combination is what people are actually noticing, not a change in your face, a change in your gravity. Music building. Here's the turning point most people miss in tea.